This conference will now be recorded.
Hey, Archana, I'm sorry. I don't know if you were able to see my request that I sent you. I know you're on vacation.
Let me
Uh,
check.
From one of these guys, I was looking for our spreadsheet that was started this whole discussion. The one that had, the
The
requirements
drop
for the
down?
server, network, whatever. Yeah, it
Okay.
looks
Yeah,
like from the module group or whatever, I think was
yeah,
the output of that group.
I can share that with you. Uh,
Well, I mean, this is shareable outside though, right? I mean, this is the current document for the community.
yeah, uh-huh.
Yeah, because my guys were thinking that they were looking at some document that said x86 wasn't included, but I think it was a planning document from that was the
Oh,
beginning of all of this, right? And I
yeah,
was like, oh no, 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 things have changed.
no, you're right, Craig. I actually saw your note and went back and tried to get to the source of that. It was a planning document that the OSF group had authored in 2019, kind of spelled out what their roadmap was that led up to this. And
Right.
so all of that was work that was, a predecessor to this one line in here.
Oh yeah,
By the way,
absolutely.
do you want to get a copy of this? I'll try to give it to you real quick.
Yeah, or just post the link to it in the chat and I'll grab it off of that.
Okay. It makes, yeah, IC is done. Okay.
Thank you very
Oh,
much.
yeah. Here we go. There we go. Okay, so let's see. So where we started last week was just let me just try to recap. So um, we have a set of checklists that we implemented this year, and those checklists did not adequately reference this table um, where the requirements are described in detail for each type of contribution, being that there was 7 different types that were defined by the Common Platforms group and then later discussed by the IC. So what happened is that we basically implemented these requirements in column B and left out this table to some degree. So what on our last call we said we need to go through and update this checklist template, which I'm sharing now, and basically be able to apply some logic to it so that you can select the type of product that you're contributing, and then based on that, it would blow out the requirements for OSF, for security, and any other um, projects, so hardware management, BMC requirements, so on and so forth. So I took the action last Tuesday to figure out how to make that happen, and I'm going to walk through that process today. So what I did is I copied that spreadsheet into here, and I merged some of the uh, explanations that were in on this instructions tab into here to try to make it self-explanatory. But the idea is that, hold on, so you'd start off with basically, should be 2 yellow boxes. And by going down and selecting, your first off, step 1 is selecting the type of equipment. And so we're going to we'll pick a monolithic server, and then we're going to pick the type of cert mark application. We have OCP inspired or OCP accepted, so we'll select this one. And then based on this criteria, it goes through and updates column D of the requirements document. Okay.
Bill, as you crafted this spreadsheet, are you targeting products to be included here or base specifications also?
This was for products, and
The reason I'm asking is I really would like to encourage everybody to first start with base specifications, and it would be good even at that point if requirements are very clear, because later we say designs and products will follow each other. A product follows a design, design follows a base spec. So if things are done from the beginning, it'll be clear what people need to do.
yeah, no, that's a good point. That was the intention. So if you're writing a specification for a like a server sled or some type of sled that goes into another enclosure, that you would select that, and then you can use these requirements to assess whether or not the specification met these intentions. So I believe that was the case. CMF, that it even though.
But Bill, the spec and the design package is completely different. We don't offer our certification marks towards a spec or a design package. So this is purely intended for products that would then be built on specs or design packages, right? So when they came here, the question was really they would be filling this out only if they're doing product. They're not filling this out if they're doing a spec or if they're supplying a design package.
Yeah,
right. But I'm sensing that there will be a gap if the spec and design did not include some of these as requirements, and the person who is building a product will come to this filter and gets really worried or confused because the spec didn't ask them to do it. They didn't do it. Now somebody is asking them to do it.
Yeah, so if you go to the spec right now, the way the spec is written is that for security, for hardware management, for firmware and BMC, it basically says all products that are looking to meet the OCP accepted recognition must have this filled out. So it does refer anyone building an OCP accepted specification to come here. And that's what we're working on. If they're building OCP inspired, the only thing that they really need is a security profile.
Right. What I'm trying to highlight here is the time difference. The spec is done today, and somebody wants to do a product a year from today or even more because spec is being cooked up. So, and if the spec guys are not writing these requirements down, later a product guy will have trouble. We need to guide them all.
well, and Steve's online, Steve Mills, and he ran the work group that when we created this. The intent, and correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, but the intent was this chart would apply to both the spec and the product. Is that a true statement, Steve? I know we didn't explicitly state that, but I think that was the intent.
I believe that was the intent. It was for spec and product. Right, we'd have to comply with these.
Right. there's kind of an evolution that we went through. So we started with this set of requirements. This rolled into an update to the spec template. And like Archana pointed out, that these should be reflected in the template as either highly, desired, highly desired, or required. And then when you got to the product, there was a subsequent to that template update, there was a checklist for the product, and that's what we're looking at here. And that we didn't add those requirements in correctly. We didn't add that table into the checklist. So that's what I've done here.
Okay, so Bill, there is now a gap that exactly as CMAC is pointing out is that in the current spec template, there is no desired, highly desired, required anywhere. So we may need to modify the spec template as well. Because this matrix that you have here for highly, for desired, highly desired, and required is not currently in the template.
What was
So is that necessary that it be in the template? I mean,
well,
we focused on the requirements, right? I know we got those into the template. You're right. We never even considered like the desired stuff because they weren't required. They were just an indication that at some point we would make them requirements, and then we would update the specification template at the future time, right?
Yeah, so if you go to the spec template right now that is online, right, the tenants were included. And then if you go to section 18, 19, 20, I believe, Bill, this is the system firmware, the hardware management, the security requirements. And I believe 18 or 19 already had the BMC included in it. It basically said it had to conform to this spreadsheet, right? Or this checklist. So that gap is exactly what CMAC is identifying, right? So I don't mean to create more work, but all I wanted to do is just let you know that what CMAC is saying is then accurate. It's not covered in the base template, and we need to cover it somewhere.
So why does it need to be covered in the template if it's not a requirement?
Well, the base spec needs to be somewhat broader and comprehensive. The subset of that is when somebody do a design package, and a subset of that is when somebody builds a product. So a lot of things are kind of optional at a spec level, at a base spec level, but the structure needs to identify if you were to do it this way. You don't have to do it, but if you were to do it this way.
And so which of these is requirements are not part of the template already? So I agree, they can go off and do other things. Those aren't requirements. But the requirements should be in the specification template.
I think what we're saying here is, as we're trying to help people organize their work, whatever we're eventually thinking the product needs to include should be included as part of the spec. These are the type of things that you need to go consider. They might consider it and choose not to do it, but if they want to consider it, the spec will have a very nice place for it. And spec is the beginning for the design and then later for product.
So I agree the spec is at the beginning. But if all of the requirements are in the specification, then all of the design and the product requirements would follow from the specification.
Again, the piece that I have a hang up with is, let's say spec is done at time 0. It starts and it ends in a year time frame. Design will start developing another 6 months or so, and 6 months later, so it's been about 2 years past, and somebody says, okay, I'm going to do a product around this. At that time, the spec guys are gone. They're doing some new projects. And the product guy has questions, doesn't know how to. Our template is asked, not the template, the spreadsheet is asking them to do something, but they don't know how to do it because it was not part of the spec.
Okay. So if we look at this, I guess spreadsheet, this list of requirements, can we theorize where one of those is?
Yeah, let's look at this top one, line 8.
Okay.
Says the mezzanine interface shall comply with the MES 2.0 or later specification. So in the spec template, we don't have any reference to a mezzanine requirement. I was just looking for that. I didn't find one. Go back to the IO system 10.
The notion I'm trying to create here is hierarchical definition of these things and a kind of layers of onion type of thing. When somebody has picked a path following a particular base specification towards eventually building a product, at the time that they're building the product, trying to get it qualified, certified, if we say, oh, now you have to go somewhere else for insight on what you were supposed to have been doing, that is not a hierarchical layered onion type of a thing. It is spaghetti.
So I suppose there's a couple of ways we could potentially solve that concerns. I guess one would be to have a spec template that had all of the requirements for all of the different products listed in it, and then the author would somehow know which one of those needs to be filled in. We could have a base spec template per product category, which is something we talked about and didn't want to try to do, I guess, a year ago when we started this, because there'd be 7 different templates to use, depending on your product type. I don't know how else to solve that problem.
I think you're right. Those are the 2 options, perhaps, good options. One of them might be just recognizing that at some point, somebody will be confronted with that spreadsheet. The entities in that spreadsheet could be in the form of a glossary, in the form of a table, even a checklist in the spec template. And as you suggested, people might say, oh, okay, these are the things that I will eventually need to worry about. So let me worry about however much of it I can today, and have a smart group of people to attack every paragraph for each one.
Mm-hmm. I guess that would work. I guess the template at that point would have to be changed every time a new requirement was set in place. When something moved from desired to required, then the whole template would need to be up-rev to indicate that, right? That would be.
That's very good. And perhaps to solve that problem, we might take the spec template as the source document so that you just change it in one place. Maybe in an appendix to the spec template might be that spreadsheet or the table that created the spreadsheet.
Yeah, I believe that was the expectation when we started this, is that we would, as we move things to requirements, we'd have to update the template on a, an annual basis or every 6 months or whatever we decide as a group when we needed to push something.
Mm-hmm.
And we also had in the appendix, right, of having the checklist to make sure that, we have somewhere to look at, have they gone through all of it and have they checked it off, right? Because if they haven't done that, then why are we reviewing it, right?
Right, and that will help a lot of people. It will help even the reviewer guys to see what needs to be included. If it is included or not is separate, but knowing what to check for is a checklist. And perhaps putting all of these things together, maybe we should make the spec template the source document so we don't have the revision control problem, things being out of sync.
Yeah, I think the template should be the source of truth. Even if we track it on something else in the spreadsheet, template's definitely the source of truth.
Does anyone know if there's a way to dynamically create a template with Google Sheets? Is there any way to apply logic to Google Sheets?
You'd have to do it with a formula.
Bill, I do know that folks have done Excel to Word conversion. So Excel would have certain tables and logic, and then they would convert it into a Word. I personally don't know how to do it, but I know, folks have, used this kind of conversion internally inside Facebook. I can try to talk to one of the folks and see if I can find something there.
A quick Google is saying that you kind of have to build it out and using the if and or nested formulas. So I'm not sure if that's a solution.
I've seen objects being embedded in documents that are links. If that satisfies what you need, maybe the spreadsheet is outside, but the spec template will link to it. It's just formatting. We need to be careful about size and formatting and such, but.
Right. It looks like there's kind of three different, this to a better size. It looks like there's kind of three different sections in the spec template that would be, impacted. One is this IO section, which would, I guess there's IO, there's hardware management, There's power delivery, there's rack compliance, and then cooling. So there's about 6 different sections that would be impacted. Hmm. Okay, so we have rack compatibility, thermal design, I/O, power delivery, software support, our system firmware and hardware management. Yeah. Gosh. If there was a way to dynamically create a template, we could do that. Does anyone want to, does anybody want to try to help do that?
So what can we, that's certainly a good way to do it if we can figure it out. What's another way we could solve this?
Well, if I go look at rack compatibility, so
Would somebody please put these couple of links in the chat box so we can maybe play with them? A link to this spreadsheet and a link to the spec template, please.
We'll do.
The first, Bill has already put the link to the first spreadsheet. I don't know if you got it, CMAC. I think you should have it. It's in the chat. And then for the second spreadsheet, Bill, I think is putting it in right now.
Okay.
And then
and the link to the latest template for the spec.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I can grab that from the website if Bill, if you don't already have it up.
I got it right here.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
By the way, Michael, this is not linked anywhere. This is just on the share. Well, let me go back and walk through what I did here, and maybe there's some way we can use this to dynamically create a template. So how this works is you select cells B8 and C8, and then it looks at the lookup table and it fills in the requirements, either desired or required, on here. And then when you go to these various tabs, then based on what you said, it either populates it with yes or no. So so all of these, the requirements column D becomes optional, or is auto populated based on how you answered it. The same with security. It auto populates that. I don't think there was anything that we actually had to change on this tab. On hardware management, it does the same thing. There's some logic in there that populates that.
Okay, I think I came up with a way for us to solve this. I think we can put some work on the people who are developing the spec. Exactly what you said right now teaching them how to run this spreadsheet, but not, again, that's my main problem was, if somebody is a spec writer, what type of product do they need to pick? That's the tough one. I don't know how to solve that. But if we solve that, then we give the spreadsheet to spec writer guys. We ask them to populate these things the way you just mentioned. And then we ask them to copy and paste the result of your spreadsheet into the spec. But because they might not know what products in the future people want to build, they might have to create multiple versions of that table. I don't know how to solve that one.
So wouldn't that be the definition of inspired?
No.
You know, I took a spec. I started with this spec. It inspired me to build this product.
So the
It's not that spec.
requirements are not needed for inspired. It's only for accepted. This has nothing to do with inspired. You can do anything you want for inspired product. It's only if you want OCP accepted that you have to meet these requirements, is where we set this up.
Well, I think that's why we're here, though, right? I mean, that was half of the reason that we're here.
It's not true either, Steve, because regardless of whether it's inspired or accepted, the requirements to have the DCI or MES or Run BMC interface is still present. OCP 2.0 or NIC 3.0 compliance is still needed. Compliance with the
yeah, more than that is that because we're envisioning future products and future renditions of things, somebody needs to write down in a paragraph or two what that means. We say such a thing, we say about NIC 3 or DCSCM requirement. How does it mean to that particular spec? Somebody needs to craft that. So it is not just a checklist of yes, no, is that if you were to do it, you got to do these things. That needs to be written in the spec.
Well, so would you be? Are you saying this should be things like, I'm going to use mezzanine 3, but you have to use a large form factor rather than a small form factor?
For example, or if you do this, then worry about this.
Well, I mean, is that what you're saying, though? I mean, that it's not just that you need to use an OCP mezzanine 3, but you need to use this form factor even of that mez. I mean, because in some cases now we are talking about a product.
I think I understand what you're saying, but the point I'm trying to make is that at the spec writing, we need to have a checklist or template or something that people know that need to consider this thing. They might consider it and dismiss it, that's okay. But they need to know that they need to check it and think about it. And if they desire to do it, they need to write it down how to do it.
So in the case of MES, on section 9 under IO system, there would need to be a statement in here that said, if your product has a mezzanine feature, that mezzanine feature should comply with either the 2.0 or 3.0 or 2.0 or later specification.
Right, and then perhaps even saying, however you choose to do it, please label it in that table in the appendix.
And the problem with that is that there's some logic, because it doesn't apply to hold on, that first one only applies to server sleds open edge sleds and enclosures that house.
But that the statement could be referring people to this table. Look in this table, and if your product or your design, based on this particular table, is required to do this, then do it that way. For perhaps every row of this, not necessarily every row times column, but for every row of this, the statement could be it's an or of any of these things, or and of all of these things, yeah, or of these things. If your product has to do this because it is one of these columns, on this particular item, each one has to have an index number perhaps also. On this particular item, do it this way. It is perhaps a method of a value entered table kind of a thing. It is algorithmically defining a table. And I think that's what you wanted to do in using a spreadsheet, but perhaps it's difficult to do that in a Google Doc or Word document. We can write down the algorithm. The algorithm says, if you're this or this or this or this, do that, which is translated to saying, based on row number 9 of this document, if any of the columns says do, then do, something like that. And do the cookie cutter, every section will have one of those in it.
Well, if that's the case, then it's just a set of instructions under 6 of these sections. That should be pretty easy to do.
Okay. Yeah, I'm looking for easy. I don't want to cause trouble, but I'm anticipating future trouble if we don't tighten this up.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, I was hoping I was done for the week. Okay. I'll go through and see if I can convert these. God, didn't we do this once and then it got completely out of hand?
Yeah, we did.
That's what I thought.
Well, I think that, I mean, isn't that kind of our challenge, right? Is to how do you keep it simple enough that it's not an impediment to doing things, but yet still achieve the results that we're seeking.
Well, I think if you can adequately explain this to a supplier that is seeking this from where they're coming today, which is super simple. If you meet the spec, you get OCP inspired. If you meet the spec and the design package, you get OCP accepted. Now there's all of these desired, required, desired plus for those writing the spec, and then there's additional requirements for those that are simply seeking, OCP inspired. They're having to go through a little bit more, and then those that are seeking OCP accepted have to go through a lot more. And Steve Helvey, you're on the call, right? So if you could, maybe you could provide a supplier's perspective there, because I don't really know. I was trying to explain it and look at it from a supplier perspective, and it wasn't working for me.
No, I'm just thinking of a good example is InnoLight, who recently joined. They upgraded because they wanted Inspired, and just working with some of these APAC companies to talk them through a checklist, whether it be accepted or inspired. It's going to have to be pretty simple.
Well,
intuitive. InnoLight, by the way, is looking at optics for this.
Yeah, I think the checklist is at least today is fairly straightforward. You know, once you select this, you know, you go over here to the tabs, and it either says it's required or not. So that piece of it, I think, is pretty straightforward. There is another problem we have with and I'll jump to it, but there's a whole category for storage devices and optical transceivers that was never addressed in that original table. And so when you have a storage device or a transceiver specification, in which we actually have, I don't know, I think we have two storage device specs and at least and a second optical transceiver spec coming out. You know, we don't have a way to apply that to this checklist. So that's a different problem.
But I also think as long as we make some enablement videos and walking somebody through an accepted example and an inspired example, that helps. So it will just take some enablement content to help coach people through.
What you guys are talking about are very important, of course, designation of inspired versus accepted. But I don't think it solves the problem I was trying to highlight at the beginning, that at the beginning of spec writing, people need to know eventually what things need to be, how things need to be done if people choose to do it. Even in the case of inspired versus accepted, they might not have to do some things, but they might choose to do something. In that case, it needs to be addressed in the spec, how to do it. Not the checklist of thou shalt do it, but spec has to guide them. For us, at the review time, at the IC community time, at the end, all we need is a checklist. We just go through the checklist. If they have not done it, we say go away. But that person or group who did a lot of work, if they knew that they needed to do it 6 months ago, they would have done it. It's just now they have a product, they want to ship it, and we are telling them, hey, we're not going to run it through.
I think our timing is certainly going to be, the grandfather time or whatever, if you will, is going to become important as we place more and more requirements, especially when you have established suppliers.
Okay, so I'm just trying to think, you know, what our next steps are here. I'll take an action to try to look at methods in which we can dynamically create a template, either a Google Sheet or a Word template. And I'll come back with a proposal. So if anyone has any ideas or can connect me with people that have done this, that would really help. The other action that I would love to see happen is we identified these transceivers and storage devices as an additional category. And we don't have any requirements on that. Would someone or some group of folks like to look at these devices and determine what's required and what's not required? Honestly, if I scan the list, I don't think anything is required here. I mean, certainly, you know, NIC, MES interfaces, BMC doesn't apply, DCSCI doesn't apply, mechanical architecture, hardware management doesn't apply. Um,
Well, are we making some, I guess, somewhat broad? I mean, this is kind of back to the original thing. What if the requirements document doesn't specify, you know, like form factors, for instance, right? Like, or the interface that they're expecting that module to plug into. Where we need to define that somewhere, it would seem. You know, even for transceivers, even for storage devices.
And I'm not sure what exactly kind of storage device we're talking about, but if it's an array controller or a storage array, that's a manageable device just like a server, and many of the server requirements might apply.
Yeah, well, there's a whole category though, the number 2 of storage enclosures and systems. So I was making the assumption that the storage devices would be the ESFs or whatever, an
NVMe drive or,
yeah,
you know,
exactly, M2 drives or
yeah.
the disk that would have plugged in. You know, we're not really worrying too much about disk, but those have a standard interface, and it's not that anyone, you know, it's hard for us to even comprehend someone would deviate from that, but everything's possible, right? Someone could come up with some proprietary format that meets all the other specs other than this mechanical part, you know, the interface part, and it would not be interoperable, or at least not to the level that we're seeking.
Yeah, we talked about that exact thing when we were first writing these, and I think Bill had submitted one where it said, you know, it should comply with, you know, like I can't remember exactly the way it was worded, but it's kind of generic specifications, and it was really hard to explain to someone, you know, what does that mean exactly, right? When you, I mean, it covers exactly what you're trying to do, right? It should comply with whatever the generic specification is for that particular component to make sure, you know, it plugs in and works. But we ended up removing it because it was so broad, it didn't really mean anything.
Right. Well, you know,
we can figure out a way to write it to do what you're trying to get it to do. We try to do the same thing. What do you say to do that?
You know, I guess I'm kind of thinking from the back view, right? So in telco, we had a situation where there was a fiber module that would go into it, you know, an outside cabinet or whatever, and every vendor had their own size factor, still connected, you know, 5 or 10 plugins, but they were a little bit different so that you couldn't have any interchange between those. And so the intent was to then specify this size and shape interface so that there would be at least a standard. If you felt like you needed your own special, you know, size, okay, fine. You know, I don't know. It's kind of like the color, right? Oh, I must have blue. Well, I've got to have red. So I say, okay, it's vanity free. I mean, same kind of thing. I'm sorry. It just seems like more work, though. for probably not much gain.
So this was the question regarding Inolite. Is it, and actually this would apply to storage devices as well, is that, is there a storage device that we would like to categorize or like to assign the OCP accepted cert mark to? And if that's true, what would we define as the design collateral necessary to get the OCP accepted cert mark?
Well, if it's inspired, it's not very much, right? I mean, it would be pretty minimal.
Well, if it's inspired, there's nothing, right? I mean, but because there's no design collateral needed. But if it's accepted, the question then, in my mind, is that what is useful to the community for a storage device or an optical transceiver? Is there something that is acceptable? That is, I'm sorry, is there something that's beneficial to the community?
So, Bill, in these cases, the main thing which is beneficial to the community is the specification. An example being, for instance, OCP SSD specification. That's beneficial to community because now many vendors can develop based on that particular specification. Similarly, for optical modules, you have a specification and then many can develop on that. So the availability of devices based on that specification is what OCP marketplace shows. So the idea is not that people can copy the spec to create the devices from scratch. So how would we consider in these situations, in these specific situations, providing only certification as OCP inspired, and there is no concept of OCP accepted? What do you think of that as a proposal?
There's nothing wrong with that, and that's where we're at today.
Right. So what we should do is, for example, when an optical module spec has been submitted and contributed, OCP has a requirement that in 180 days we submit a device in the marketplace, and we can probably get the vendor to submit that device as OCP inspired and meet the requirement of OCP that in 120 days an ODM's contribution has happened.
That works as long as they're a tiered member. And in the case of Inolite, was a community member.
Right.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
you're right. I mean, that there for OCP inspired for tiered members, it's very straightforward to meet that. As long as they meet the spec, then they get the cert mark.
So with Inolite upgrading to silver, that uncomplicates things for them.
It does, yeah. It does. Problem solved. Yeah, and maybe maybe this is the solution: is we don't need to address this other than continue doing what we're doing, which works.
Yeah, I think your question is, if it's OCP accepted, is there other things that we would require them, right? I'm not sure what that would be. There's some sort of security related requirements. I don't know what would be different about those components than anything else.
Well, I guess I was thinking that if you have a power system or a frame or switch gear, that there is some benefit to the community to review the design, look at a bill of materials, things like that. that's beneficial. On a storage device, I don't know that there's, and again, I'm just naive about what it takes to design like an M.2 module or NVMe drive, but I don't know that there's anything that's actually beneficial to someone else. So if you look at switchgear as an example, you know, one of the biggest benefits, I think, to, you know, sharing the design, and EdgeCore shared, you know, dozens of designs, is that the entire industry basically gelled around, you know, a common power supply. And, you know, it drove the volume and availability on that exact power supply module. So there wasn't any real design copying that went on, but access to the bill of materials started to make a difference. And that was, and I would classify that as beneficial, you know, to the community. There was some other things that the industry kind of standardized around. It was some DC power connectors. It was a mechanical tray design. You know, it made this network equipment fit better within OpenRack, and it shared some common ingredients. When I look at an optical transceiver, I don't know what would be beneficial to the community.
So I agree with you. I don't know what that would be. So what would we be giving them an OCP acceptance
Yeah.
for, right? What would that mean if they're not opening up their design and they're not contributing anything? What would that mean?
Yeah.
I have an opinion here. I'm not sure if it is widely accepted. You guys agree that OCP is not just a marketplace for people to come and shop around their products, right? We are encouraging collaboration. We are encouraging interoperability. When anybody is doing anything, we want to be able to add to it somehow. If things are actually dead end, just to produce a product and for 1 year and 2 and then go away, those are not very useful in an open source community. Is that true?
I believe that's true, and so having that design detail around rack designs, power subsystems, you know, server sleds or storage devices, storage enclosures, allows an evolution to occur more easily, and that evolution, you know, it can be backwards compatible, you know, assures some level of interoperability. That's all goodness to the industry. So
Okay.
I think with certain types of products, it you know, having those design files has been useful. And like I said, no one actually copies the whole thing, but simply having a starting point is beneficial.
And I'm not sure how relevant this is for this particular conversation, but I just want to let you know that as we broaden more out to ACS and to some of these others, you will see OCP enabling technologies come into play. Like, for example, we have a cable provider that has around 15 SKUs that would love to take place and be able to brand their components. So that would just be thinking longer term on how this can be expanded easily, I guess, around, say, non-specific hardware devices.
So again, if I go back and look at and just say under the category of storage devices, optical transceivers, and we can throw cables in there, I don't think any of these apply, and which would say that now we're back to a basic electrical mechanical specification. maybe a description of how it, behavior, the behavior of the device. If there's, a manageability for a specific to a device, it may describe that. And then a product that complies with that can be inspired, or you could release the design and be accepted. So I think there is this other category that I have in yellow for these miscellaneous type of devices.
Sorry guys, I need to go, but perhaps the reason that as you created this new column, you didn't find any row that made it requirement, was that the column was somewhat of an afterthought. Maybe you can come up with new rows that will make these column be required in some other items. There must be something required for these things too, right?
Well, there could be. You're right. There could be additional rows we put in here in addition to the columns. But I think the columns that we have today, I do think we need to explicitly state that it doesn't apply, so that if you do have let's take a cable design, we can then say it's a cable design, none of this applies to it.
I appreciate that, but the point I'm making is that anytime we add a column, we need to ask the question, what are the type of things that are required of that entity? And therefore it needs to create a row for which there's at least something required. That's what I'm thinking now. That's a raw thought.
Yeah, so you're saying that so for whatever is required for the storage device or the transceiver, it would be an NA for server, network, storage, rack frame, and it would only have applicability in that one column.
In general, correct. But there might be an item that, hey, just because we have a new column, it makes a requirement for another column. That might be. Algorithmic would need to allow for that. Okay, sorry, I have to go.
Okay. Well, again, hey, let's drop. Thanks for everybody's participation. Let's try to meet again next Tuesday. And if you have ideas on how to dynamically build work templates, let me know.
Okay, I'll reschedule this for next Tuesday.
Okay, and let me know sooner than later. Otherwise, I'll probably be, nonstop trying to figure this out for the next 72 hours. So.
All right.
Archana,
thank you, everyone.
Archana, do you
thank you.
shared with the rest of the IC?
I'm sorry?
You want me to upload this recording and share it with the rest of the IC, or not worry about it?
I need this recording and the one before this. So if you could pull those for me, that would be great, because I want to put it up on the IC Wiki and kind of organize it a little bit better.
Yeah, sounds good. I'll get those over to you right now.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you, everyone.